Moving on to our feature of the evening, a severe drought has arisen in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland and Puntland, with 250,000 people suffering acute food insecurity. Our reporter Khalil Charles has more.
The drought has stretched from east of Sanag to the borders of Ethiopia and Djibouti. Awadel and Silal are amongst the worst affected areas. The El Nino effect has exacerbated conditions and compounded an already challenging humanitarian situation. An estimated 1.7 million people, or nearly 40% of the 4.6 million people living in these areas, are in need of humanitarian assistance and livelihood support. Of these, 1.3 million people are at risk of slipping into acute food insecurity. Many families in the Awadel and Salal regions have lost their herds to the drought and are heading now to the nearest towns. Droughts are all too common in this region of Africa, and famines are not unknown. The last major famine to hit was in 2011, resulting in the death of over 260,000 people. Local aid agencies, civil societies and the Somalian diaspora across the globe have launched fundraising appeals to provide critical life-saving assistance and vital food supplies for the 1 million people in the drought-affected northern regions of the country. The export data collected by the Food Agricultural Organization of the United Nations indicates that Somalia, Somaliland and Puntland have exported 4.6 million goats and sheep, 340,000 cows and 77,000 camels in 2014, worth an estimated £280 million. Livestock is the mainstay of the Somali economy, contributing 40% to the country's gross domestic product. If funding is not secured to support families through the drought, the consequences could be grave. Malnutrition-related deaths have already begun to occur in the Awadel region. Khalil Charles, Africa This Week.
To discuss this, we have Jama Noor, Project Manager, Adam Smith International, and Farhan Hassan, Social Justice Campaigner. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
So, Jama, where is this drought taking place?
Mainly the drought is taking place in the western regions of Somaliland, and the worst hit is in outer region of in the west and Salal as well. There is also, it extends all the way to eastern Sanag and other regions as well, in Sahel and Togdere as well. But it also reaches to Puntland areas and even to the south. So it's quite a severe drought, which is covering most of the Somali inhabited areas.
And Somaliland, as we know, and Puntland are unrecognised states, and a lot of the international media are unaware of this. Do you think this has had an effect on not understanding this acute crisis?
Yeah, and in terms of understanding, unless you have got coping strategies and international aid, then it's going to be difficult for unrecognized country to be able to have policies and strategies to cope with when there's a drought or natural disaster like what we see now in Somaliland and other parts of Somalia as well.
So 250,000 people affected. What does this mean? Hunger, displacement? What can you paint us a picture?
Yeah, it means, first of all, it can have a different effect. It could have a environmental effect, human effect, and livestock effect. As the clip says, and 40% of the economy of Somalia and Somaliland is dependent on livestock. Imagine if that 40% are not being able to cope with the drought, what could happen? In terms of environmental, you can have other effect as well. Forced migration could be one where people cannot live, for example, in Awadel and move from Awadel to other parts of Somaliland, and similarly, other parts of the Somali region, there could be a further migration to other neighboring countries, and that can have multiple effects regionally and globally.
So in terms of drought being a crisis issue, do you think that it's reoccurring in this region for a particular reason?
I don't think there is a particular reason, but there is generally, and it reoccurs every other year, and it has become a routine for the last 20 or so years. So I think it's, and there's no such a long-term plan to tackle with this. The biggest problem is that there is this short-term, plan and haphazard, response whenever it comes. And everybody knows that it will come. It will definitely come every year. So there should be some kind of a long-term plan to tackle with this and, help these people to be resilient and to tackle with these effects of the drought. But just to go back to the effect, I think the biggest effect will be the economic one, because these people are losing their livestock. When they lose half of them, the economy, the backbone is also livestock, as my colleague said. But when you take that picture a couple of years forward, what you will see is that the economy is down, people are still in poverty, they can't help themselves and can't help their children. So it will be quite a long-term economic effect.
So this is mainly in the rural areas, and we know that droughts can obviously lead to famine, and we have the massive famine of 2011 that led to over 260,000 deaths. Do you think that it's too the spotlight on these droughts are not enough because of what could potentially devastatingly happen?
Yeah, I will say definitely it's not enough, because if that would have been enough and the spotlight is enough, we would have seen a bigger response. We would have seen, up to now there is no such a notable response from the international community or from the aid agency or from any other place. So that shows that there is a limited response to this.
So who's to blame? Local governments,
I think there's
international
multiple.
agencies?
Natural disaster is one, because there's no one can control when the rain comes, because one of the key causes of this drought is failure of 2 consecutive rain season. That's one factor. Also, I think there's the overgrazing, over cultivation, and can cause, for example, soil erosion, desertification. So you can see that is a natural disaster and a human activity. So I think one strategy that can be taken into account is when this goes away. Probably we hope that the rain will come in the rainy season, April to June, which is going to be hopefully soon. But if that fails, we can have the same difficulties and same situation in 2010, 2011, where people were not able to survive due to hunger and lack of water. And we can see, and actually, if we don't take appropriate steps internationally, regionally, locally, diaspora needs to get together and do whatever they can to support this disaster that is folding in front of us.
So what should the diaspora and local agencies and governments do to help?
Already, there are lots of activities going on as we speak now. There are lots of community organizations, individuals, and people from different regions getting together, doing whatever they can. But that needs a government involvement as well, because as an individual, they already in the region, there are a lot of, and if you're talking about poverty, if you're talking about conflicts, there are places where there are conflict zones. So for international organizations, there could be a security issue, access issue, but where the diaspora are the one of the key lifeline in terms of supporting a situation like this. This is their time. It's not the first time, and it's not only in Somaliland and Somalia, in the whole region. There are over 10 million people who are obviously going to be affected, and it's very important to not wait when the situation gets worse. It's the right time. We need to get together, put all the effort together. So obviously that's one. To blame, there is a lack of incoherent policies in terms of regional government. Like in Somaliland, I haven't come across any proper and rural and agriculture policies. So that could be something that we can think about in the future.
So this keeps happening. So what can be feasibly done? We have these think tanks and local and international agencies, but are they doing enough? What can they do?
I won't be able to say they're not doing enough, but perhaps it's the resource they have is not enough to tackle these problems. But I would say there is a two-way problem. The first one is that there is no local policies, of course. There is no local strategy to tackle with this. And secondly, there is no international community response. It's very short term, as I said, and it is not looking beyond today and beyond that moment. So I think there is two-way solution that we can the resources locally should be pulled together so that they can tackle the long-term problem and not and secondly, the international community should be a bit more generous to help these problems and for the long term. Make sure that if they put more resources in today, that will save a lot more resources in the future. So I think.
And how much are we talking in terms of resources and building infrastructure, would you say?
I think the infrastructure, the most important infrastructure now, for me, it seems to be like building big dams, because the water, literally all the water that comes to Somaliland or Somalia goes to the sea. So the first step should be somehow to make sure that this water is at least held and the people make use of it when there is a drought. So building dams will not be very expensive, but of course we need a couple of millions to do that.
I think to add to that, I think education is the key. If we can educate the local community in terms of land management and farming and practices, how they do farming practices in the long term, international aid development is the key, and diaspora and governments can do, and I'm sure there are a lot of government and responses in terms of locally as I saw on the news, but that is just a reactionary. I think what we need is more proactive kind of strategies.
Are there enough resources to educate people?
There are resources, but it's how you use that resource. If your resources are about election and politics, then that's your priority. But if 40% of your economy is based on livestock, 20% of your economy is based on agriculture, so that's 60%. 40% is based on diaspora's money. So you can see where would my priority would lie. And the rural nomadic people are the most generous, most resilient people on earth that I come across. When I want to go to the region, you'd be amazed. And I think it is duty, it's obligation to save their lives, because they don't need a refugee camps. They don't need to migrate to Europe and Africa.
But they are migrating, as we know, even now with this ongoing drought. So how can the economy be diversified to stop this?
Of course, one of the to do that you need, and like Jama said, and you need water. That's one of the lifeline of a human being, a basic human necessity. If you can, all the international actors, regional, local actors can come together and focus on and design, maybe for the next 10, 20 years. We know the world is changing in terms of climate and global warming, climate change. Even in the UK, we had a flood not long ago, and that is not been happening for a long time. So you can see maybe in the future, this is a El Niño kind of effect and is affecting the region as well. So you can see, but now is the time to sit down together. This hopefully would, and the first priority should be emergency aid, wherever that is, whether it's remittances, international government, and local government, and that is the immediate reaction we should do as a human being. But the long-term international development aid assistance is the key. Local, we should be thinking about fishery. We should be thinking about, for example, services. How can we use local services? And that could.
Do you not need the political will? Is there the political will?
I think political will be crucial if we need to move forward and solve these problems permanently. But I think there's a political will to some extent, but the political will needs to be action more than the political will. So if you just will, it will be a wishful thinking at the end of the day, but you have to do some things, and basically it doesn't need huge sums of money to start with. You can manage your resources locally. Somaliland's budget is around 300 million. So, and as far as I'm aware, the budget allocated for helping the rural population is negligible. So that shows, that's self-explanatory. You don't need to wait for big sums of money to come from outside world. First, you have to do something, and when the world see you are doing something, is when you can get something.
So rural people, I know, are moving into the towns.
Cities.
So is there a clear, as you say, a clear divide that's not helping the crisis?
Yeah, there is definitely a clear divide, and the problem is now when these people are, most of them are losing their heads, as you have said at the beginning. But when they lose, they're all going to the cities, and the cities you already have very poor services. You don't have enough health professions. You don't have education for these people. So that will create, you know, congested surfaces for the community, and it will even deteriorate the situation in the cities. So it will affect in both the rural and the cities.
To some extent, I disagree with Jama. I think there's no political will. If you look at, for example, Somaliland and political parties, manifestos and policies and action, I haven't come across a unified kind of response where all the political parties come together and doing something about it. Whereas in terms of voter registration, which is very good, there is a lot of energies and resources. Similarly, when this election comes, there's a lot of resources and also security, and I can see that it's important. But if you go to in Somaliland, in a rural area, when you talk to people on the ground, only the time they see politician is when they vote. And I think this is the time they could hold them to account and say, what have you done for the rural community in terms of crisis, like the human crisis that we see in front of us
in
now.
Somaliland.
In Somaliland and other parts of
across the region.
The region, yes.
As of now. Thank you for your comments, both. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. I want to thank all my guests for joining us and to you at home for watching. Current title holders of the African Cup of Nations, the Ivory Coast, remain on course to defend their title at the 2017 finals, despite being held 1-1 to Sudan. Morocco became the first team to qualify for next year's Africa Cup of Nations with a 2-0 win over Cape Verde. We will leave you with scenes of the Ivory Coast team training to bring the title back home once again. We'll be back next week at the same time. Until then, have a good evening.